All right, so let's talk about fat, because keto diets are in fashion right now. And people are even promoting keto diets for athletes, which is the worst idea I've ever heard. Prolonged exercise can result in the body using fat for fuel, but not dietary fat for fuel. What happens is the body starts accessing stored fat for fuel, which is a good thing, particularly if you're trying to lose weight. The amount of fat stored in an average person, it can fuel a 950-mile run or 120 hours of intense exercise. I don't recommend that, by the way, but if you were to not eat anything and exercise, you actually could draw a lot from your fat stores. Now, the amount of glucose that you can store, and this is why you need a steady source of it, can fuel a 20-mile run and 1.6 hours of intense exercise. The leanest, healthiest athletes have between 50 and 100,000 calories worth of fat stored. So what happens is, when you do lower intensity exercise, let's say when I run out the front door and I'm going to go run for 45 minutes just for fitness, that I like running and it's one of the things that I do. What happens is I start burning fat after a little while for energy because I'll run out of glucose in the bloodstream, all right? As the intensity increases, the proportion of energy that's coming from the stored fat decreases and what's needed from glucose increases. Progressive endurance training increases the size and number of the mitochondria, so you become more efficient at burning fat. So this goes to the reason why some people exercise is to lose fat and to gain muscle and to live a long life. That's me. So the more I run, the more efficient I get at using stored fat for fuel, which means that I don't really have to worry about a net fat gain as long as I eat well and I exercise. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's a reason to stay with exercise, because the more of it you do, the more beneficial it becomes, because your body acclimates to it and becomes much more efficient. And on a very small level, that's what professional athletes do. They work out and work out and work out so that their body becomes better at doing all of the things that are involved in sports. However, fat oxidation is not enough to reduce the amount of carbohydrate you need from fuel. Increasing the ability to metabolize fat should not be a sign that athletes should start eating more fat. One of the problems, by the way, with eating a lot of fat is a lot of times the fat that people are eating comes with protein, animal protein. And another problem is that athletes sometimes get this feeling of almost omnipotence, like I'm in such great shape on the outside and I have such high aerobic intensity or capability that maybe I don't have to worry about health like other people. And they're not inoculated against the bad effects of bad eating. So one example is Alberto Salazar. I don't know how many of you have heard of him, but he's a former Olympic marathon runner, represented the United States on a number of occasions. He's also one of the best Olympic running training coaches in the country. And a few years ago, he suffered from a massive heart attack. So here was a guy who looked great on the outside. If you look at pictures of him the day before he had his heart attack, you think, wow, what an athlete. And he was. And he was training athletes, knew a lot about training people. So he had a massive heart attack. Why? Because he was protein and fat loading instead of eating a high carbohydrate diet. Some of you who know the story of Bob Harper, same thing, looked great on the outside, promoting fitness, had a heart attack, and then instead of promoting plant-based nutrition, he's on the payroll for the drug companies, which is truly depressing. But have you guys seen his ad? He's promoting I think it's a cholesterol-lowering drug or something like that, or blood thinner. But anyway, he didn't learn. He did a 3-week vegan diet and then went back to eating protein and fat, which is really unfortunate. And now hasn't apparently learned much from this latest episode of a heart attack. But the whole point that I'm making is that you're not exempt from what happens to people as a result of poor dietary choices just because you're fit, just because you're muscular. And we have to keep that in mind. So increasing fat intake does not improve your athletic performance. All right, so let's talk about this protein issue. I want to show you the mechanism by which your body will just start breaking down its own lean mass if it has to survive. So just some basics of protein. So anabolism is a state in which the body builds new tissue, and it does it every day. Your whole body remodels itself every so often. I mean, you get a whole new skeleton every year. Everything is regenerating. It slows down, the regeneration pace slows down, which is why we don't live forever, but we do regenerate. Catabolism is a state in which tissues are broken down and amino acids are used for fuel. Proteins are broken down into amino acids, which contribute to the amino acid pool. And one thing I want to explain that will probably help more than anything to understand this protein and carbohydrate issue is the difference in the way that the body metabolizes protein versus carbohydrate. So I teach by analogy, so here's a good one that people readily understand. So glucose is to the body, which comes from carbohydrate, like gas is to the car. You fill the tank with gas, you drive for a while, the tank says empty, you have to go get more. We all do that, right? There's no other fuel for the car. All right, then I want you to picture for a minute a fountain in downtown Columbus, where I live, that has 500 gallons of water in it. Do we put 500 new gallons in every day? No, we just replace what splashed out or evaporated, so maybe 20 new gallons of water. That's the way protein works, because protein's broken down into peptides and polypeptides and amino acids, and then those amino acids are joined together to make enzymes and hormones and various things that the body needs to function. And then when that enzyme is used, the amino acids break apart and they go back into the pool and they're reconfigured again. And they can be used so many times before they're torched and you can't use them again. So protein is to the body like the water in the fountain is in downtown Columbus. You only have to replace what gets torched, what evaporates or splashes out. All right, so that's, and the other thing too, is digestion is a deconstruction process where you have the food breaking down, the protein is converted to, or broken down into amino acids. So people who talk about you have to eat complete proteins and all that sort of thing, you don't have to do that at all, because it all goes into the pool. And it's being broken down as it goes through the body. So once it gets to the amino acid pool, then various combinations of amino acids are put together in order to make things that the body needs for function, just to put it in very simple terms. All right, does everybody understand that? The difference between glucose and protein byproduct. Okay, so most athletes are consuming more protein than they need, and unless they're eating themselves into obesity, the protein is displacing some of the carbohydrate. And power athletes do more of it. They'll eat even more protein, and they'll even take supplemental protein in the form of drinks and supplements and that sort of thing, which makes things even worse. Now, protein is important for making muscle. It is. Your body uses it for that, and hormones and enzymes. But high protein intake will result in your body having to burn some for fuel. And first of all, it means that there may not be enough protein for other functions. So your body's basically saying, listen, we really would like to make some enzymes and hormones, or we'd like to replace some muscle tissue, but we can't do that. We're going to have to use the amino acids for fuel. The other thing that it can result in is going after amino acids that readily convert to fuel in the muscle mass to fuel the body with energy. And once again, can't emphasize this too much, your kidneys get charged with discharging the waste product that comes from nitrogen, which is released when the amino acid chains are broken down, and that can really cause kidney damage over a long period of time. And one thing I'll mention too is if people are getting their protein from food, it's almost always accompanied by higher fat intake, which is a risk for coronary artery disease, which I mentioned before. So nitrogen balance is a way to measure protein, how your body's using protein. So positive nitrogen balance means that nitrogen intake is exceeding nitrogen excretion. So that means that your body has additional protein left over, amino acids left over, to build stuff, hormones and enzymes. You want to be slightly positive, all right? Negative nitrogen balance means you're excreting more than you're taking in. So where is the excess nitrogen coming from? It's coming from breaking down muscle mass. To grab amino acids, one of them is alanine, converts really well to glucose. Very counterproductive for athletes. So you can measure urinary nitrogen excretion. That's how we know how much protein humans need. It's actually really small because of the fact that the amino acids are recirculated like the fountain, like the water in the fountain in downtown Columbus, all right? So that's why your protein needs are so low. So we can measure that. So what this means is if you have a negative nitrogen balance, that means that your body is using protein for fuel, muscle mass. So dietary carbohydrate, back to eating potatoes and squashes and rice and beans, will solve that. And starvation diets, the people who are at risk of burning up their own lean muscle mass in order to fuel their bodies are people who starve themselves, so people with eating disorders, people who restrict carbohydrate carbohydrate intake, think paleo or keto, and people whose energy needs are less than or more than their energy intake.